Belief systems, the anthropology of religion. The systems of beliefs and practices that we call religion has been the result of the attempt to answer questions about our origins, purpose, the meaning of life, and the afterlife. Anthropologists identify religion as a cultural universal, meaning that it can be found in all cultures. However, many cultures do not have a word for religion, nor do they make the distinction between religious and non-religious behavior. Many people today, when asked about their personal belief systems, are likely to answer that they're spiritual but not religious. Does this describe you? Religion is an organized set of beliefs and practices designed to account for the non-ordinary world, the metaphysical world, and supernatural life forces. I mentioned in the introduction that religion is a cultural universal, but there are some things that we do know. All societies have a belief in the soul or souls. There are a number of cultures that have a belief in more than one soul. They have rituals to control and or appease supernatural forces. And all societies also have a belief in life after death. Not all societies separate religion from everyday life. Not all societies have written records, which sometimes makes it difficult for anthropologists to study and know the particular religious beliefs and practices of various cultures that don't have written records. And it's also known that not all societies distinguish between the natural and supernatural world in the same way. This is what we call the classification of reality. What some people see and think exists may not be the same in other places. We'll now look at some common elements of religion. First is the belief in transcendent powers or deities. There are several definitions that are important here. The first is animism, and this is really where the idea and theories of religion began. And that's the belief that nature is enlivened by personalized spirit beings that can be separate from their bodies. Animatism, and that is nature itself, is enlivened by impersonal supernatural spirit power. Polytheism is the belief in many deities, while monotheism is the belief in one deity. The next common element of religion are myths. Myths and stories about origins, the meaning of life, and humans' place in the universe. It's very important to understand that in the anthropological study of religion, the word myth refers to sacred stories of a religion. It does not mean something that is not true, but it's about how the universe came to be, how humans act. There are many different kinds of myths that we are familiar with, or sacred stories, including creation or origin myths, flood stories, trickster myths, hero myths. There are more modern, recent examples of hero myths include Star Wars, Harry Potter, and The Wizard of Oz. Ritual activities based on beliefs are another common element of religion. Rituals are a combination of gestures, symbols, and language. And while the gestures and symbols carry their own meaning, language, which is a collection of symbols, helps to clarify and define the actions of a ritual. A very common ritual activity that is found in many cultures around the world would be rites of passage. There are three stages to rites of passage. In the first, separation, where individuals are removed from their former status. They are generally taken and isolated from the rest of the community for a set period of time. They undergo a period of transition or initiation where they receive instruction on what it means to be a member of a particular culture or what it means to be a part of their new status. For example, there are situations where individuals are moving from adolescence into adulthood, and so they're given instructions on what it means to be an adult in their particular culture. And then finally, incorporation, and that's when individuals re-enter society with their new status. At that point, they are seen and recognized by the larger community as having achieved and become that particular person or that particular status. Again, moving from adolescence into adulthood, they're now seen no longer as children, but as adults. Rites of passage imprint the change in a person's social status on the minds of the participant and grant community approval of legitimacy for the change. Some rites of passage are very familiar. These include rites marking a person's progression through life, things like birth rituals, baptism in Catholicism, confirmations, quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and other important life cycles, things like marriage and death. And anthropologists mark all of these and see these in various communities and various cultures. Symbolism is another very, very important element in religion. Symbols are objects which represent or have an agreed upon meaning. Symbols can be classified as either direct symbols, they represent things, or indirect, in which they have an agreed upon meaning. Religious specialists are the people that are responsible in some way for leadership when it comes to many religious rituals and observances. We know that shamanism, actually not prostitution, is probably the world's oldest profession. In addition to shamans, there are also healers, diviners, mediums, priests and priestesses, prophets, and many more kinds of religious specialists that are found throughout the world. We also know that in many cases that societies structure organizations and institutions around religion. They often are interwoven into the larger aspects of a culture. Religion is not just a personal concern, but it's also a communal concern, that there are also a community of believers in one way or another. Just about every culture has some way of people coming together in a communal or congregational sense on some level at some point in time. We now turn to magic. Magic is the application of belief that supernatural power can be forced to act if certain rituals are performed. In your reading about baseball magic, it talks about the various rituals and other things that baseball players engage in when it comes to playing to ensure or to gain more control over those aspects of the game which tend to be less controllable, which tend to be more uncertain. And it's an important part of that. The article by George Melch is a very classic article and used in a lot of studies about anthropology of religion. And we know that baseball players are probably among some of the most superstitious of athletes. But there are many other sports that also find that athletes and participants in them have their own observances. We'll talk some more about magic. There being a couple of kinds of magic. The first being imitative magic, the idea that like produces like, that if you desire a particular result, that you will do something to imitate the outcome that you're looking for. The second is contagious magic, the idea that things that have once been in contact with someone continue to influence each other. For example, if you take a piece of clothing or personal items such as a person's hair from an individual and you do something to that item, that it will cause similar things to happen to that individual. And very often in many cultures, people are very careful about leaving around personal effects and things with the fear of them being used against them in some way through the use of magic. Witchcraft and sorcery are something that are oftentimes difficult for people in the West to understand, but we're going to talk about those now. Witchcraft is defined as the use of innate or psychic power to induce harm for people, while sorcery is the use of magic rituals and materials to inflict harm on people in socially unapproved ways. These are both classic definitions of witchcraft and sorcery, and there are many exceptions that could be found. But the interesting thing also to point out is that while both of these are methods of inducing harm or harming people, there are also some beneficial aspects to witchcraft and sorcery in terms of being a leveling, having a leveling effect upon society. We also want to take a moment to talk about Wicca, because people who are Wiccans do also use the title very often of witch, and we don't want to confuse that with the definition that we had earlier in the discussion about witchcraft. In this case, Wicca is about a neo-pagan tradition. Notable thing about it is that it's a polytheistic religion with gender equality for the god and goddess, that Wiccans see nature as a manifestation of deity. It's nature-based with a ritual calendar following the seasons of the year and other occurrences in nature. Some common symbols of Wicca include various images, candles, ritual knife, wand, cauldrons, cups, broom, a pentacle. And part of that, their philosophy is to do no harm to anyone. Some social functions of religion include social control, that religion very often in societies functions to discourage inappropriate behavior among individuals and adherents. Religion can reduce conflict by reducing stress and frustrations that people feel. Religion also can reinforce group solidarity because people gather. We talked about earlier about people coming together and having a fellowship or community of believers or followers or adherents or practitioners. And religion helps to provide that and an expression of a common identity. People seeing themselves as a part of a larger, meaningful, and significant group. Some psychological functions of religion include cognitive function. That's an intellectual framework that explains parts of the world that people don't understand. Very often that is put into the realm of the sacred. The emotional aspect of religion that helps to reduce anxiety by giving ways of coping with stress through things like such as maybe prayer, meditation, performing other rituals to take care of those things. Another important aspect to consider, particularly given the current climate in the world today, is religious fundamentalism. Religious fundamentalists, they reject the modern and favor what is perceived as being an earlier, purer, and better way of life. It's based on a strong feeling among its adherents of alienation from the surrounding modern culture. Fundamentalists assert an identity that's separate from the larger religious group from which they arose, and they see a sharp divide between themselves and other religions and between a sacred view of life and the secular world and what they see as being nominal religion. And we finally close with the idea of spirituality. And spirituality is defined as concerns about the sacred and non-ordinary world on the level of the individual.